Live from the 607, it's the Ocho Duro Parlay Hour, where we're talking everything movies, TV, comics, and entertainment. Join in the conversation on social media with the hashtag ODPH, because here we go. Welcome to a special edition of Fanlight Zone Presents. My name is Ken M. You know me as the host of the ODPH podcast. I'm also the editor-in-chief here at FLZ. And tonight we have a guest on that is long overdue to come back. But he has a great new story out in trade paperback form, because if you follow Fanlight Zone on New Comic Book Day, you know we love this series. And now it is finally out in that one-stop shop form, trade paperback. And there's a lot to this all-ages fantasy book that we need to dive into. If you have not read The Last Witch by Boom Studios and Fear and Fire Volume 1 that came out in 2021, and of course Blood and Betrayal that came out in 2025, now is the time to get caught up, because like we say, the author is here ready to deep dive. But you know his work from Assassin's Creed, Shakespeare, or Kill Shakespeare, because I have to say it in the fancy voice, and he also knows about turning music into a weapon because of his biography of Fela Kuti. And it is our honor and privilege to bring back the one and only CONOR McCREERY back to Fanlight Zone Presents. CONOR, what is going on?
I'm actually in Italy right now. That is what is going on. I am in Turin, Italy. I spent the day eating cornettos. We walked around and explored the city. It is one of 4 2-week vacation breaks that they have in France. For those who don't know, I've been living in France for the last year and a half as a bit of an adventure with my family. One of the benefits of being a writer is publishers could ignore me from all over the globe. So it doesn't really matter where I am writing my query letters. I'm in Italy. I'm with my wife. I'm with my kids. I'm with my wife's parents. And yeah, we're eating pizza. We're doing tours, and we are having a great time. So that is what is up with me. I am sitting here, and I am filled with some wonderful Italian food and maybe a couple of tiki drinks. And so I am set and ready for this interview.
Well, that's the best way it should be, because you should be celebrating, because The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal is finally out in trade paperback form. One of the best all-ages fantasies I've read, and there's a lot to deep dive into this. But in case somebody that is watching or listening is not familiar with this book, and listen, I'm going to give a one-time pass for it, because after this interview, trust me, you're going to be running to the stores and going and buying this. CONOR, what is the story of The Last Witch all about?
So, the short form version is, think of something like Avatar: The Last Airbender, if it was set in medieval Ireland, and there was just enough child cannibalism. So what it is about a 12-year-old girl who discovers, her name is Saoirse, she discovers she can use magic after a coven of witches had destroyed her village, leaving only her bratty little brother, and her cigar-smoking grandmother, thank you, Roald Dahl, to help Saoirse master the 4 elemental magics so she can stop this coven from opening a door that could destroy the world. And so book 1, Fear and Fire, which you mentioned, was very much about setting up the world and starting to send Saoirse on this quest of learning this magic, gaining her power and gaining her strength. But one of the twists in The Last Witch that is, say, different than Avatar: The Last Airbender is there's a reason why witches are considered monstrous, and why they eat children, and why we have all these, stories about witches being evil. It's because magic itself is actually not for humans. It comes from the fairylands, from beyond our world, and it leaks into our world. And people like Saoirse, who can sense it and use it, are changed by it. So there's a bit of a Breaking Bad aspect to The Last Witch. This idea that, with great power comes great responsibility, but also with great power comes change and corruption. And so as Saoirse, every time she learns a new spell, every time she defeats one of the sisters in the book, we are getting closer to her saving the world, saving us all. But we're also getting closer to Saoirse losing everything that makes her, and starting to become one of them. And so ultimately the question in The Last Witch is not necessarily, is Saoirse going to save the world? It's, is Saoirse going to destroy it?
Yeah. And it is such a journey to go on. I said volume 1 is amazing, but volume 2 definitely elevated the stakes so much. And how you handle the fantasy genre, like I say, is really impressive. Have you always been a fan of this style of storytelling?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, so my dad was born in Ireland. So Irish, and weirdly enough, he was one, I feel like when people immigrate somewhere, they're either very set on trying to keep their culture and pass it down to the next generation, or they kind of go the other way. They're like, no, I'm in this new place. I want to learn all about the culture of the place I'm in. And my dad ended up being a bit more like that. And so my brother and I were never really encouraged to, explore our Irish heritage. It wasn't, forbidden, but it wasn't something that my dad was really like intent on passing on. And I think that had the effect of me wanting to know more. And so I became really obsessed with Irish mythology. And Irish mythology, like a lot of mythologies around the world, except for kind of in North America, it's dark. And the heroes, they win, but what they lose in the victory is so substantial that, you're sort of like, it becomes a Pyrrhic victory. And so I always kind of loved that dark and Baroque style of fairy tale storytelling, the Brothers Grimm, or for stuff that was very relevant to me growing up, things like The Secret of Nim, The Dark Crystal, The Black Cauldron, these stories that were intense and they were scary. And these were not stories that were particularly worried about creating a safe environment for, the children who were watching them. These stories were very comfortable pushing, kids into some places that felt uncomfortable. And I think that's why those stories stayed with me, is because they were scary. And I wasn't sure if they were going to be all right in the end. And that's what I wanted to create for my kids. I wanted to create a story that at night, if I'm reading it to them, the bed covers start coming up and you're like, oh, hey, do you want me to stop? And it's like, no. And then also as an adult, that I would be really excited to read. And then if my kid was like, oh, can we read it again? I would be like, hell yeah, we can. Like, I love this story. And so that's what I was trying to put together.
Oh, I think you completely succeeded. I mean, this is one that on the outside, yeah, it looks like it would be almost for kids, but then the more you dive into it, oh, no, this is complete all ages. And especially with the storytelling that's involved with it, that, I would say it does head into a lot of more darker territory. And especially one moment in particular involving a certain beverage that was given to the true hero of the book, Brom. I would say, was there ever a concern about taking this story into that kind of darker direction or to that level?
I mean, I don't think I really consciously thought about it too much. I mean, I knew there are things that happen, especially in book 2. There are a couple of moments that are sort of twist reveals where the villain of the story does things that are pretty awful. We're not talking about things that are gory. We're not talking about things that are disturbing in the sense of like a horror movie, but they're disturbing in the sense of when, the idea of who you put your trust in and who you can believe in. And, that's why the book is called Blood and Betrayal. And so I don't think I did too much thinking, about this idea of like, oh, would this be too much for a younger audience? I think I knew that it would actually probably be more confronting than having some monster, some horrific looking monster, earlier in book 1, small spoiler, one of our heroes, loses one of their eyes. Right? Like it's, but I think what happens in book 2 is a lot more confronting because it's not necessarily like a physical damage. It's maybe more emotional. But I think what I realized was when I was writing these stories, whenever the most intense emotional parts would come, naturally the next scene I would write would really lower the stakes. So in book 1, the whole book is about the inciting incident is, in Ireland, they don't have Groundhog Day. They have something called the Feast of Imbolc. That's the day the Colic, which is the queen of the witches, is out. So on the sunny day, if it's sunny on Groundhog Day in Ireland, you have to stay inside because the queen of the witches is out and she loves to eat children. And in the book, this is the day that Saoirse decides to go out, to go beyond the hedge at the end of the village to prove to everybody how special she is. And when you get to the end of the first issue, it has what I think is kind of the most intense part of the first book, where all of a sudden Saoirse realizes that her little brother Brom, who is right behind her, and he had this kind of a cold, so she could hear him wheezing. All of a sudden she realizes she can't hear him. And she races around this tower, which now seems impossibly big. and she finally gets to the front of the tower where before there had been this old rusty locked door, and now the door is open, and now there's a bloody handprint there. And the next bit of that story is pretty intense as Saoirse ventures into this tower. There are bones, kind of Secret of the Nim, if you remember the owl's lair. This was very much a pull from there. And there's a very terrifying witch that she has to confront. And then after that, naturally, like for me, the action pulls down. And I think every time the book started to get pretty intense, the natural next thing that came to me as a writer was to bring in something that was a little quieter, a little more character development. And I think for younger readers, it's not a matter of things being intense. It's a matter of how long the intensity is kept. And if you keep it for too long, I think you do burn out younger readers. I think you burn out anybody, really, to be honest.
Yeah.
And so I think, it wasn't a conscious thing, but when I look back at, the 340 odd pages or whatever the book is, the two of them combined, is there was this natural rhythm that I wasn't conscious of writing, but I think looking back, that's why I never ended up being like, oh man, is this too much? Because when it got to a fever pitch, we had our climax of a scene and then we went somewhere else and we had a chance for the reader to just take a breath, dive into a different part of the story and to be able to decompress. It wasn't forcing it into forcing it on them.
Yeah, no, I have to agree with that. I mean, I think the pacing for this is like so intricate, and especially like you touched upon, there are big moments that happen in this in both volume 1 and volume 2 that when they hit, you give the reader enough time to let it soak in and embrace it and like really like let that moment hit. And I think like especially on that side of the conversation, it's so vital to have those moments really stand out and really, affect a reader like that. Because I'll say when there is a moment in Blood and Betrayal, it hit me so much, I actually had to yell out something and just like, oh my God, this happened. And to get that moment and then let it sink in and go, oh my God, like, how is this going to, domino effect everything else in the story? It's moments like that, I think, they're the lasting effects you want as a writer or as an artist when you put out your content and it hits the audience on that. Would you say?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think whenever you're trying to create something, you want there to be, you want to tell a good story first and foremost, but part of telling a good story is having a few key moments that people are going to remember. Right. And I think, look at Star Wars, right? I mean, what is the first thing anybody remembers from Star Wars? It's, Luke, search your feelings. I am your father, right? Like that's the moment. There's so many great things in the trilogy, but that moment sticks with you, right? And, I think there's a few, in any story, you want to have a few of those real high-pitched moments. And so, before the show, we were talking about this moment you mentioned. And yeah, it's really sad. I mean, that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted the reader to have to take a break and be like, what the heck just happened? What is going on? And, that, again, we're being a little cagey here because we don't want to spoil anything for people. But when I wrote that bit, I've got 3 kids, and my 2 older kids, when I was reading them the story for the first time, were both like, no, Dad, no, that's not what happens. Like, that's not right, Dad. You made a mistake. And, they were kind of angry at me. They did not like that turn. And I kind of just had to reassure them. I was like, look, when we get to the end, it'll make sense and you won't be so angry, but I'm glad you're angry right now. But yeah, they had that visceral reaction. And yeah, I think as a writer, you can get those kind of reactions from readers, then, that's the big thing you're searching for, is to get a reaction like that. So, I'm glad it affected you that way. I'm sorry you had to shout out some questionable language, maybe around other people, but I'm glad it hit you that way.
I'm just thankful nobody had a camera out. That's the only thing. A camera phone, like luckily nobody did, because they would have had a very viral moment on my behalf. But I would have taken it because, like I say, the story is so good, and especially of how it goes in ups and downs and how you walk through, Saoirse's, evolution, if you will, and to see like. Obviously, she has been through so much in this series, both volumes 1 and volume 2. What has been your favorite moment from the series so far?
I mean, my favorite moment. That's a good question. I mean, I think for Saoirse, my favorite moment is probably, it's probably at the end of book two. I mean, you have the classic structure, right? With stories, and you want your characters to change. And when we meet Saoirse, she she's a really kind person, but there is this layer of anger that is just underneath the surface. And so I think in some ways, my favorite moment is, at the end of the book, there's an opportunity for her to make a choice, and she could go down the road that would be kind of the quote unquote villain road, but you'd really understand why she did it. You might not even consider her a villain. You might actually consider what she was doing to be the smart thing, that the person that she is dealing with maybe doesn't deserve mercy, that their actions have actually kind of damned them, and they've earned this horrible fate that is befalling them. And the fact that Saoirse tries to stop that she tries to save somebody who maybe doesn't deserve to be saved, to me, that really is it really shows how much she's changed. And so I think in a lot of ways, that's like just, it really shines forward her humanity, which I think, one of the things that people have told me about this book, it stars this 12-year-old girl, and she is often angry. And she's often, she really is a very angry, fierce character. And I've had some readers tell me that they really love that because they think it's really cool to get to see a young girl allowed to be angry, and that is just who she is. And I've had maybe not the readers, maybe parents of readers sort of not being quite sure what to make of this 12-year-old being such an angry, forceful character. But I think at the end of the day, it's like this moment really just underscores what her humanity is. And then I would say, there's a character named Hugh who's kind of comic relief. There's a bunch of scenes that he is in, especially in book one. There are some scenes that I really enjoy where he is kind of teasing Saoirse and bringing out the lightness in her, which I had a lot of fun with. And in book two, Brom, who is Saoirse's little brother and who is integral in Saoirse's ability to ultimately succeed. Spoiler alert, the hero does win. But he has a fun little scene where he is equipping himself for battle with a stick and a cape, and is sort of, giving them names. And that was just a lot of fun for me. Brom is such a fun character.
Yeah, I was going to say he is, I would say arguably, is he your favorite character to write in this universe?
Yeah, I mean, because Brom is, he's kind of like 9 years old. He is just full of excitement, and he one of my kids, my kids are kind of around that age, and it is an age where kids have a lot of insight. They're a lot smarter and more capable of handling things than we probably give them credit for, and they're also completely free of guile. They just say what they feel. And so, yeah, Brom he's a very fun character because he just says what he is the most honest. He's the most infuriating. He's the funniest. And so, yeah, when you write him, for me, writing him was really easy because it's like, what does this character think? That's what Brom's going to say. There's none, with Saoirse, even with her grandmother, who's this lovely mentor character, she is doling out some of what she knows in little pieces because she doesn't want to overwhelm her daughter. So, even though she's the Obi-Wan Kenobi character, she has a little bit of subterfuge to her, where Brom is just, this is what I think. And, that's very, it's very freeing as a writer to come up with fun ways for characters to say exactly what they feel in a way that is, funny, infuriating, whatever you're trying to go for in the scene.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it definitely comes off with him. Like, he winds up stealing so many scenes in both volumes that, he instantly becomes a fan favorite. And to see how his relationship with Saoirse has evolved. I mean, guide us through that journey, because they're both thrown into this world and they kind of have to navigate it. But by the time we get to the end of volume 2, there is a definitive change, I would say, in both of them. Would you not?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, when the story starts, I mean, it's sort of like there's a little beat where Brom finds out that his big sister can use magic, and his response is basically cool, right? Like how cool it is, right? The person he loves the most in the world can do magic. That this is amazing. And so, when the story starts, he's very much her cheerleader. But as I was saying to you, like the problem for Saoirse, or one of the problems, is that the magic is changing her. The magic has a corrupting influence, and Brahm is better situated than anyone else to see how his sister is changing and how that is kind of frightening. And so I think his relationship with his sister is integral, because he changes because he gains maturity and he starts to realize, like, some of the hero worship of his sister falls away, and he can kind of see her for her flaws, but because he loves her so deeply, he just sees the flaws as things that they can overcome. He's not judging her for it so much. And that kind of unconditional support and love ends up being huge for Saoirse to be able to overcome her challenge and to be able to ultimately control the magic.
Yeah, I would definitely say so, because where he provides that support, I mean, it's so needed, and especially it hits at the key times too, because when Saoirse needs that extra motivation, Brahm is right there and always has, maybe not the perfect delivery, but he's always got the perfect, shove, so to speak, to get her going again. And that's what's needed. And I always say it's such a cool dynamic between them, because obviously you see where they are in the first volume, and then now, and where Brahm has really elevated his stock in the story, and like where he is positioned, and it's been even Hugh to a degree too. I mean, for being the comic relief, I would say he has probably the biggest evolution that fans probably did not see coming in this.
Well, thank you. I mean, he was an interesting character. Sometimes when you write, you realize you've kind of made a mistake. And so I got one comment that came back. It was on Goodreads. And, I dip in, I'll admit it, I'll dip in. I'd like to see what people think, right? You want to either hear people like a story and you can feel good about yourself. And if they think it's bad, they're idiots. But this one person made a comment about, because there'd been kind of a bit of a romance between Hugh and Saoirse in the first book. And somebody made a comment just around how they thought that romance was sort of, at best, uninteresting, and at worst, maybe a little problematic, given that he was supposed to be kind of, older than he appears. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't really thought of it through that lens. And it definitely influenced how I went to write the second book. And so that meant that Hugh had to change from being sort of this always flirtatious kind of character, because I was like, yeah, I mean, if he is kind of meant to be someone who's lived for quite a while and Saoirse's only 12, you're right. There is something a little unusual about that. And so the second book, there's a change in tone, because I was like, oh, I think I took the wrong tact. And that meant that I had to focus on Hugh in a different way. And yeah, I think one of the things I like best about book 2 and ultimately Hugh's story is we get a bit of a sense of the cost of being something so different. In the book, Hugh is sort of his mother was a fairy, and his father was mother was a fairy and his father was human. And it means he doesn't really have a foot in either world. And in book 2, we kind of explore what the emotional weight is of that. And it led to a few plot points that I wasn't originally considering, in terms of how his support of Saoirse stops valuing his opinion, because some of what it's kind of like if all you've ever wanted to be in your life is special, and then suddenly you are, right? Like Saoirse, she can use magic. She is special. And then people are trying to point out to you that the thing that makes you special might actually be the thing that might destroy you. Are you really going to be able to hear that? Yeah. And, Hugh is trying to tell Saoirse that. Brahm is trying to tell Saoirse that. And even Nan, in her own way, who, she's one who's pushing Saoirse the most. She is, if she is Obi-Wan, she's a very stern Obi-Wan, because of the stakes. And she's, when other people are like, you're pushing Saoirse too hard, she's like, this is a matter of life or death. I'm sorry if you don't like the fact that this is hard for Saoirse, that she is encountering things that is making her, upset and is making her question herself. But we don't have time for anything but me making her this sharp weapon that can defeat these sisters. Mm-hmm. And, part of the book is you can kind of decide whether is that the right path or not. But when Hugh is trying to bring this up, because he is sort of outside of that circle of family, he's the one that Saoirse is able to kind of take her frustration and anger out on, and that forces Hugh to sort of look at himself. And there is a brief scene in the book where Hugh talks about how lonely he feels. That was never intended. It came out just through the way the book story changed. And I look back now and I'm like, oh, it's one of my favorite moments, because it really is this grand moment where you feel really deeply for this, how awful it must be to be caught in the middle of nowhere. You don't really belong to anybody. And I'm sure, it wasn't intended to be a metaphor for anything, but I don't think you have to think too hard to see how it can be a metaphor for many different people in the world who feel like they're caught in between cultures, communities, what is expected of them and what they are. And, hopefully there'll be some readers that'll hit home for them, because it'll speak to them. And that would be cool. That would be really cool if that's what happened.
Yeah, well, I think that it's very noticeable. And I think that it's something for his character that it was a great progression to see, because he went from being the real comic relief to a much more, I don't want to say serious, but to act more mature about what was going on, I think is probably the best way to say it. But I think it was, to see that side of him, it actually gave him more depth than he had in the first volume, which I was like, okay, this is really cool. And to see that evolution of his character, and in heading into where I think we're going with him, I think that's going to be a nice, fun moment for readers to watch as he progresses even further. Because obviously, without spoiling anything, we can't end things on this volume. Is there been any talk with you and the rest of the team about volume 3 that you can share?
I mean, so there hasn't been any official conversation with Boom or anything like that. So the second trade has just come out. So, I mean, the realities of comics are going to dictate in terms of what are the numbers like? How many people at the Family Zone Presents podcast are going to hear this and pick it up and, tell friends, and their kids are going to love it, and, the knock on wood version is, it gets passed around. And I do think it's a really good story, and that people buy it, and Boom comes back and says, so what's next? With V Glass, who's the artist, who's absolutely incredible. If anybody out there has seen this book, the V's work, I think I wrote a really good story. I think V drew an incredible story. Like, V is so talented. They do such a good job. I am so lucky to get to have worked with them. Natalia Nesterenko was a colorist, and her work was absolutely next level. Like, the book looks like $100 million animated film. Like, it's just so incredible what they've done. So I've had some, so V and I have had some conversations over what the next installment would be. Without spoiling too much, book 2 was actually quite delayed. As you mentioned, book 1 came out in 2021. Book 2 comes out 4 years later. Then there was a period where it was not clear that this was actually going to get finished at Boom for a whole bunch of reasons, none of which are Boom's fault. It was just COVID, markets, economy, all these things. Mm-hmm. And so there was a point there where V and Natalia kind of came back to me, and they're like, so what are we doing for book 2? And I was like, I don't really know. And they're like, well, you've written it, right? And I'm like, yeah, no, it's all written. It's done. And they're like, well, just send us the pages. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Of course you can read them. No problem. They're like, no, just send us the pages. We're going to start drawing this. And I was like, but I don't know where it's going to get published. And I'm not sure where the money is coming to pay you. And they were basically like, the universe will figure that out. This story needs to be finished. And so, my thought with, an eventual book 3 would be, I'm not sure how it's going to work yet, but the universe will sort it out, because book 2 got sorted out by V and Natalia just being like, we're doing this thing. And we just trust it's going to find a home. And, in the fullness of time, all of a sudden I had a random little conversation with Boom, and an editor there was like, what did you ever do with the second part of The Last Witch? And I was like, well, funnily, you should mention that. It's all drawn and finished. It just needs to be lettered, and then it's ready to go. And they were like, you should send us those pages, because we've been thinking about The Last Witch for quite a while, and it would be nice to finish this arc with you. So, who knows how the universe will bring the next book to us.
Well, we got to put that karma out there, because from top to bottom, and the art in this too, like I say, to capture the emotions that are going on here. And there's a wide range, and obviously in reflection of the events that take place. It is a truly magnificent read from top to bottom, and there just for where it takes you as the reader. If you're into fantasy, like this is really a story that it will take you very high, take you very low, throw some curves at you, make you yell out loud at certain aspects. But it's such a very cool story, and especially with how it ends for volume 2, which no spoilers, everybody needs to go buy the trade paperback. Like I say, it's one that we want to see more. We have to see more because it's just that good. I mean, that's just my opinion for it, but I just sit there and read it, and I was like, yeah, like, and usually I don't gravitate towards all ages stuff, but this one I was like, man, this is like really good. And it had me just immediately going like, I want to see more. I want to see more of this universe. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just putting that card out.
Well, no, I appreciate it, and I think I think hopefully the reason it spoke to you is because when I was writing, and I was writing it for the younger version of myself, but I was still I was writing it for myself, and I wanted it to be a book that anybody could pick up. It really like when I'm at a convention, there are kids, and I can you see families walking by, and you can just see there's a kid somewhere between the ages of like 8 and 11. And you can just sense that, oh, this is the book for them. But every once in a while, when you're kind of pitching it, you're obviously talking to the parents because they're the ones who are going to be making this decision, at least in lockstep with their child. And it's really satisfying when you see the parents starting to really get into it, and they're like, oh, I'm going to read this. And you're like, awesome, because you should read this because this book is just as much for you. If you love fantasy adventure in any way, shape, or form, if you're the kind of person who loved Labyrinth, any sort of fairy tale type of story, The Neverending Story, Pan's Labyrinth, like any of those kind of things, I feel like this would be a book that you would just enjoy on your own. And so, I'm really glad, Ken, that, that this is a book that spoke to you, because there's been a few people out there who've been pretty big fans of the book who, they're not talking about how they were reading it for their kids. They're just talking about how they read it for themselves. And it was just, they just really dug it, which is, as a writer, that's what you want.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I say, I recommend this if anybody asks about fantasy books. I'm like, The Last Witch is really good. And like, you won't see it coming just because like, you think all ages, and that'll throw some people off. But when you dive into the story, it's like, holy smokes, like this is going some places. So that's why everybody needs to go out and get the trade paperback, and we need to have volume 3 come out at some point. So I'm putting the karma out there. But in the meantime, though, you're involved with a new outfit and Black Mirror Comics. So let's talk about that for a little bit here.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, one of my really good friends in comics, a guy by the name of Neil Gibson, he ran a company called TPub out of the UK. It was sort of a boutique publisher, best known for publishing a bunch of his work, which was the most famous of which is a series called Twisted Dark. And Twisted Dark is kind of like oh my gosh, I'm just now totally blank. The Twilight Zone. So Twisted Dark is sort of like the Twilight Zone if every Twilight Zone episode was actually interconnected. So It starts with all these weird one-off, super twisty, often super disturbing stories. And then, so you get a volume of short stories like, oh, wow, great. There's some amazing short stories in here. And then you get the second book and you read through it and you're like, that character just showed up again. Interesting. Okay, whatever. And by the time you get into the third book, you start to realize that this is all part of a much bigger story, and that all these characters you meet in these little Twilight Zone twisty tales are all connected, and that there's something much bigger going on. And so it's honestly, it is probably the greatest comic series that most people don't know exist, just because, and Neil has done the convention circuit. He has got a hardcore group of loyal fans, but like, he's a small publisher in the UK, so he's carried in UK stores, but like he's carried in some North American stores, but it's not like he's got some big distributor like, Diamond used to be, or PRH or anything like that.
Sure.
And it is such incredible work. And anyway, so last year I got involved kind of, I've always been working with Neil. We've done a book together that hasn't come out yet, but the first book is written. We're just finishing the second book. And I got the chance to get more tightly involved. And one of the things that TPUB, which is now known as Twisted Comics, they have the license for Black Mirror, and so they have put out the USS Callister came out last year.
Okay.
And I think the Kickstarter just closed, but you can do late bids. They just did San Junipero, and it's got some incredible cover art and work. And so the Black Mirror line is with Twisted, and they have the license to do Black Mirror comics. And they are, I don't know how much I can say or not say, so I'll put it at this, is they are exploring opportunities to broaden some of the story worlds that you would have seen in Black Mirror.
Okay. I'm definitely intrigued. No, that seems like a very cool concept too. And especially, to have that license, that's definitely one that you can, if you can really expand on, because, diving into, a fandom like that, and then, spinning it into your own visions of, where you think the story would go. I mean, that's got to be, how much of a challenge is that for you as a writer? Because, with the fan base, fans are very passionate about properties, and then to kind of spin it into something else.
So, I mean, I can't speak too much about it because the first two books I had nothing to do except to cheerlead. I can, speaking for Neil, I think, the big challenge is how do you take, it's like any adaptation, right? Like, how do you take something that was a longer format that you now have to compress? How do you keep the core of the story, even though you're going to have to lose? Unfortunately, it's like adapting a book to a movie, except it's almost going the other way. Is you're going to lose some of the absolute best parts, because sometimes the absolute best parts are the things that are a little extraneous to the core of the story, right? It's these great character moments. And so, Neil really just wanted to focus on like what makes something like USS Callister. What's the core of USS Callister? What's the core of San Junipero? And so, he's really focused on that. I mean, USS Callister came out, people were very excited. They were really loved how he kept the heart of that. And, San Junipero, did bonkers business on Kickstarter. So we will, we're going to see, but the early reactions from fans have been really positive, because San Junipero is probably the most beloved episode in Black Mirror. And it was really interesting because Neil is known, again, his company is called, Twisted. His best series is called Twisted Dark. His company is known as Twisted Publications. So it was really interesting to watch him write a story like San Junipero, which, again, not to spoil for people who haven't seen it, but it's actually like a really lovely love story. There are some Black Mirror-esque twists in it, but it's a really beautiful love story. And so it was really funny to watch Neil write something that was so against type. I'm used to him, if there's a beautiful love story, something awful is about to happen in his stories, right? And it's going to be even more awful than you thought it could be, right? Like, he has a gift he's one of the nicest human beings you'll ever meet. But if you read his stories, you would honestly think he was like Jeffrey Dahmer on steroids, because his stories are sometimes so incredibly effed up that you were just like, this person has to be sick. Like, this person has to be a horrible human being. And he's not. He's the nicest guy in the world. But yeah, the Twisted Dark, you can go to Twisted Publications. I think you can actually read the first book or most of it for free on his website. And I highly recommend anybody, get The Last Witch, but carve out a little bit of your time to go and see Twisted Publications and read some Twisted Dark, because honestly, it is an absolute magnum opus that comparatively speaking, very few people are aware of in the comics world, and it should be so much bigger than it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a wild comparison we were saying, to think about, like, taking a horror and going there with it. But yeah, no, I mean, I would say right now the independent scene is really exploding, and like, for you watching it as a writer, like, what's your take on the scene of comics right now?
It's really interesting because, I think on one hand, like, I think Marvel and DC is doing a lot of interesting things. Mm-hmm. But I think Marvel and DC are also, they're almost captured in this, still quite very large, pen that they put themselves in. But yeah, you see indie comics, and I think North American comics are doing more and more what you would see in France, in Belgium, in Japan, where comics had always kind of just been seen as a medium. And so you read comics through your entire life. There were comics aimed at older readers. There were comics that are nonfiction, like it's just really broad. And I think the North American market is more and more going into that space. And somebody said something really interesting to me. They were like, we are seeing the dog man effect in comics. And what they meant by that was that you had a whole generation of kids who grew up on Dogman, right? Massively popular. So they love comics. They grew up on comics. But Dogman's not a superhero comic. It's not Spider-Man. It's not Batman. It doesn't have this long lore. It doesn't have continual reinventions of the character. And so these kids are wanting to read new comics. They want to read stuff that's meeting them where they are now because they're in their 20s. They're getting their first jobs. They've got some disposable income. And they grew up loving having these hardcover Dogman books. And they are a digital generation. And they want physical media. And some of them are getting records. But the thing that's the easiest for so many of them to get is graphic novels. And so this guy's theory was that you're seeing all these kids who grew up in Dogman coming into comic shops, and they're not against reading superhero books by any stretch of the imagination, but that's not what they cut their teeth on in the way that you or I would have cut our teeth on superhero books. And so they're much more agnostic, and they're much more likely to come into a comic shop and pick up The Last Witch, Fela Kuti, Twisted Dark, the Hippopotamus Cocaine Massacre, Fred Kennedy's new book, right, which is amazing.
Yes.
They're much more likely to pick up something like that just because it interests them, and they don't have the same, I guess, loyalty to the big two and the legacy characters. And so, yeah, I think maybe that's why the indie scene has done so well, and why a lot of people I'm talking to think it's going to be more of a long-term trend, is just you have this generation of kids who love comics. And again, they're not against superheroes, but they don't mean the same thing to them that they would have meant to you or me, right? Like all my first comics were superhero comics, right? I fell in love with Spider-Man and Batman because that's what I had as a kid. And if I'd had Dogman, it would be a very different thing. Maybe this means humor comics can actually, not that Chip Zdarsky needs any more help, but maybe this means, humor comics can really actually get their shot in the, I remember I pitched so many humor comics in my career, and it's always like, yeah, but funny books don't really work. Yeah. Maybe I'm just not funny.
I don't think that's the case at all. But I think it's just a situation now that fans are looking for so much, in their comics. Like they don't want to have the typical superhero books. And right now there's just so much of a great boom of it right now that no matter where you're going in the shops, you're finding great stories that are, really allowing creators to, go places and really take readers into uncharted territory. And you're finding just some of the best stuff in years are now at the stores right now. It's such a, like, for me going in to go buy it, it's an amazing experience because it's just like blown away by everything that's out right now.
Yeah. And I think, I think there's also just, we're in a bit of a golden age of comics, right? Like, I think, you had that first Vertigo era, right? Where all of a sudden you had this opportunity to just, for comics, all of a sudden could be, the realm of what a comic was, like that exploded. All of a sudden comics could be all these sort of different things that people didn't realize. And then, I think, that era kind of, I don't want to say it died, but it just got more financially risky. Companies started getting nervous, which is the reality of the industry. And I think, we've got this combination of, there's a ton of new publishers coming up. There are, you look at DC's getting back into that Vertigo world, right? As they announced a few months ago, right? Like, I think you're starting to see, we're just seeing that upside again of a lot more companies are just interested in building new stories. And what I'm encouraged by is, I think for a while, the idea of like original IP was very much tied into, well, can we sell this and turn it into a movie? There was so much of this was like, and I get it. That was a financial lifeblood, and it continues to be for the industry. I think now, just my sense of it is, it's just editors who are like, I've had editors be like, I want something weird. What's your weirdest idea? And it's not because they think your weirdest idea is going to get turned into an HBO series. It's because they think your weirdest idea might be your most fun idea, and they just want to make fun, good comics. And they kind of just trust that if they keep making fun, good comics, enough of them will be financial successes that the business can make the next batch of fun, weird comics. And that's an exciting place to be. It's exciting when editors are like, get weird, because that's not normally how you walk into these scenarios. You're normally like, oh, I want to be weird because that's who I really am, but I'm also trying to sell this thing. And if it feels too personal, then maybe they won't get it. And I think now there's just a lot of editors who are like, give me personal. I don't have to get it. I just have to, I can tell if it's good, but I don't have to get it in the same way. So that's exciting. It really is. And it means we're getting better books.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's a great time to go to the shops and go get books such as The Last Witch Blood Betrayal, out on trade paperback right now. But Connor, before we let you go, obviously we talk sports when you come on. The NBA is getting ready to go to the playoffs. Do you have any predictions, any kind of feelings? Who's going to be holding up the trophy at the end of it all?
I mean, okay, so I'm a huge hoops fan. I really love my basketball. I mean, for me, it can only be one of the Oklahoma City Thunder, the San Antonio Spurs, the Denver Nuggets. My spicy prediction is I'm going to say the Nuggets are going to beat the Spurs in round 2.
Whoa, okay.
And I'm like right on the fence. My heart, as a basketball fan, what I would actually love the most is I would actually love to see the Nuggets win the title. I love Nikola Jokic. I think he might be the best player in the history of the game. Like, it's possible. Don't at me, Michael Jordan fans.
Yeah. I'm listening to your argument for it. So yeah.
But I think, like, he won this one title. The Spurs look like they're going to be this monster. They've got this young player, Victor Wembanyama, who's an absolute monster. The OKC have a Canadian by the name of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he's the greatest guard since Michael Jordan. Don't at me, Kobe Bryant fans. But I would love to see Jokic win another one, because if he wins another one, I think it really cements his legacy as one of the great players in the game. And I think the Nuggets have a great team. I think the Spurs are maybe a little young yet. Like, they haven't been through the fire. And, if you're a real basketball nerd, you'll notice that Victor Wembanyama rarely plays more than 30 minutes. And I think when you get into the playoffs, he's going to have to play more. And I think, I watched the Spurs and the Nuggets played a game, just about a week ago. And I think Wemby, I think he was a little gassed at the end, because he isn't used to going as far. And, the Spurs are doing it. They want to keep him healthy. Big guys have a long, famous history of having lower body injuries. And so limiting minutes makes sense. And I think with the Thunder, the Thunder's Achilles heel is, if you really dig down on them, once you get past Shea, they actually are not a great offensive team. And unless their number 2 guy, Jalen Williams, really has a big boy playoffs, I think the Nuggets might beat them both. I think there's enough. I think this might be Jokic's last best opportunity to submit his masterclass thesis of, I'm the greatest player in the game and I'm one of the greatest players in the world. And I think he might be the best. And I think he's going to take that opportunity, and I think he's going to shock the Spurs, and I think he's going to shock the Thunder, and I think he's going to get his second title. And I don't know if he'll get another one after that, because I think that'll give the Thunder and the Spurs the battle scars to maybe come up above. And as far as the East goes, I just don't think there's any team. The Celtics are interesting. I think they could give somebody out of the West a really good fight. I don't know if anybody in the East is at that level.
Do you think the Knicks can actually get to the finals?
Could they get to the finals? Sure, 100% they could. I don't think they will. And I think the Knicks, basketball is such a cruel game, because you can have a team that is really, really good, and then you get into the crucible of these 7-game series where teams just know everything you do. And I think the Knicks are a really good team, but I think the problem is they've got this great point guard by the name of Jalen Brunson. They've got this really dynamic offensive center by the name of Karl Anthony Towns, and the two of them are defensive liabilities. And I think the East has some very good teams, not quite at the level of the top of the West.
Mhm.
I think the problem is like they need Brunson and Towns because that's what makes their offense goes. That's what makes them special. I think in the 7-game series, those two guys are going to get exposed over and over and over again because neither of them are very good defenders, and the Knicks are not going to. They're not going to get to the finals.
No, that's fair. I mean, I think for them, it's like it's now or never because I think if they don't get to the finals, they're going to implode that team. Giannis will be in New York next year because anybody not named Brunson will be traded to Milwaukee, and with the draft picks for the next 10 years probably because they will hit the panic button and go because without Halliburton in Indiana, I mean Tatum, the fact he's back is astounding. But I think that if they don't do it this year and get to the finals, yeah, that whole team is gone as we know it. And the Denver argument, I mean, that is a great one if they can stay healthy. That's the only thing that I think has ever hurt Denver. I think I agree with you. OKC, after you get past SGA, there is a drop off. And I think like he is just one of those players that makes everybody better around him. But if it comes down to having somebody else step up, if he's having a bad night or, God forbid, an injury.
I mean, he never has a bad night, right? It's just a matter of like they generate a ton of open threes in the last two playoffs. The guys who've been really good 3-point shooters in the regular season have been very mediocre in the playoffs. And you see this, the closeouts are faster, the stress is higher. And, like I'm a Canadian. I love Lou Dort. I think Alex Caruso is amazing. I think Carson Walls, like they've got so many great, vicious defensive players. But I think this playoffs may make them be like, you know what, we got to cash in one or two of these really great defensive players to get somebody who can give us some more juice on the offensive end. My one caveat is that the Thunder have this one guy by the name of AJ Mitchell. He's not a very well-known player. He's really, really good. There is a world where AJ Mitchell has his coming out party in the playoffs, and all of a sudden people are like, J-Dub, as they call him, Jason Williams, like he may be the second best player, but AJ Mitchell might actually be the second most important offensive player. That would be my wild card with the Thunder as to why they might, pull back the Nuggets. But man, Jokic is so good, and Jamal Murray is he's just proven to be an incredible playoff performer. Aaron Gordon is, I was talking with a buddy of mine. Like Aaron Gordon is he's the poster child for why NBA players need to find what actually is their right fit. He could have been the star in Orlando for his entire career. He probably could have won a couple of playoff. He's a really good player. He could have probably won a play around or two in Orlando and been like an Orlando Magic legend. But like in Denver, he's the third piece of if they do what I think they could do and win a second title, he'll be the third piece of considered one of the great modern teams in NBA history. And every NBA fan who cares about this stuff will know who Aaron Gordon is. And I just think they've improved their bench. They've got Cam Johnson, they've got Hardaway, they got Brown back. I think they've got Braun and Peyton Watson gets healthy. I think they're just so much deeper than they were a year ago, and they almost knocked out the Thunder a year ago.
Yeah, a lot of people forget about that. They were right into the end. They just had a couple bad games there, and the injuries started kind of plaguing a little bit. But I mean, that goes with any playoff team. Like you get in there and it's just is that more intense, and you're seeing a lot of injuries happen. But yeah,
look to the Celtics a year ago when they lost Tatum, right? Like that Celtics team probably should have gone back to the finals, and Tatum got hurt, and then Knicks swept them aside.
Yeah, like that's the whole thing because they had nobody else that really stepped up after Tatum went down, and that's the thing when you have such a star player that runs that team, that you need somebody to step up and role player. I mean, the same thing happened with the Knicks couple of years ago too. It's like there's been opportunities for teams to really make a run, but just when injuries happen, that just sinks everything. But coming out of the West, I mean, I think it's going to be tough for anybody. I think OKC and Denver, that would be my two picks in there. I agree with you about Wembanyama. I think that they're not there yet. They could make a run. They'll probably get to, a good point in the playoffs, but I don't think they're going to cash in this year. I still think they're one player away. They're just too young. And I think that, Denver's got a great chance. I think it's going to be them and OKC in the finals. If it depends on how it matches up, like one of those two will be in the final, without question.
Yeah, I think so. Like I think with the Spurs, like it may be one more player, and maybe just one of the guys they have existing that needs one more year. Like Stephon Castle's really, really good.
Yeah.
Like, but I think also one of the things that's a little different for the Spurs versus the Nuggets and the Thunder is like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, who is the Thunder's best player, will have the ball. Jokic, who is the Nuggets' best player, will have the ball. Wemby, the way the Spurs use him, and a little bit maybe just the player he is, still sometimes needs somebody to get him the ball. He's not going to be bringing the ball up, as soon as the ball is inbounded over. That's De'Aaron Fox's job. And I think that might end up being, when I was watching that game between the Nuggets and the Spurs, every single final possession the Nuggets had, Jokic had his hands on that ball. Yeah. He had his fingerprints over everything. And the only times he didn't, it was because it was a quick hitting fast break opportunity that he wasn't involved in, and the Nuggets scored right away. Where with the Spurs, there were some plays down the stretch where Wemby just doesn't touch the ball because he's still a big man. He's going to get down there. He can do all sorts of things, but the ball is in another player's hand. And I think that might be the weakness for them, is just the Thunder and the Nuggets best players will have the ball in their hand more than Wemby will. And not that Wemby's not as good as them, he's just not going to have as many opportunities to impact the game, partially maybe because of minutes, and also just because he's not the guy who has the ball in his hands the way Jokic and Shea do.
Yeah. No, it's going to be fun to watch. Like, I'm excited for the playoffs. I think that's going to be a really telling story this year, depending on how it matches up. Because, like I say, the East is wide open. And the West, yeah, I think it comes down between those two teams. I mean, San Antonio could sneak in there some way, somehow. But, even Minnesota too, but I don't think they're going to. I think they're going to be a lot shorter this year on their run in the playoffs. But it's always exciting to watch. Like I say, you can't beat the playoffs anytime.
I mean, they are my biggest, in some ways, my biggest threat to my Nuggets predictions, because it's probably going to be Nuggets and Wolves in the first round. And the Wolves are not afraid of anybody. The Wolves walk onto the court and they're like, we're the best team on this court. And they could be playing the freaking Monstars and they could still feel that, right? Like, their level of confidence is truly incredible. And so, if you told me they somehow just played like a vicious series and knocked out the Nuggets in the first round, I'd be like, yeah, it's possible. But yeah, and I didn't mean to rain the parade at the Knicks. Actually, I think the Knicks have done a lot of good things. I just think the problem is, especially like in the East, where there's like, I just don't think Jalen Brunson's going to be able to hold up to, whether it's Cade Cunningham, whether it's Brown or Tatum or even Derek White or Donovan Mitchell and James Harden. Like, I just think 7 games of Brunson having to defend, because they'll attack him every chance they get, and they're going to try to drag Karl Anthony Towns into every action they can. And it's not that these guys don't have heart. It's not that they're not trying. It's just, they're just not great defenders. And I just think that's what's going to kill the poor Knicks.
No, I completely understand that. I don't get mad about it because, like I say, I'm New York forever, but I am very realistic about that. And I agree with you about Cat. Like, the Cat analysis is perfect because, yeah, he is atrocious defending the ball. Like, I will be the first one to tell you, like, if it comes out of a defensive stop, I'm not holding him for anything. Like I already say, just throw up the 2 points or 3 points, wherever, it's going to be a game. But I just think that it's going to be just so interesting to watch this team, especially too with the Giannis talk surrounding him so much.
Yes.
And allegedly that's where he wants to go, which, I mean, for a legacy, if he could win there, he would cement so much. But I always tell people, I said, listen, I'm glad we didn't trade for him this season, because I think that now is the time, let this team run its course, what it's going to be. But I think if they don't win it this year or go to the finals, at the bare minimum, they're imploding that team, top to bottom, with the exception of Brunson. I think he stays. And then you're going to see a whole new lineup there next year. Is
Giannis your dream acquisition if it doesn't work out this year?
See,
or is there somebody else that you'd be like, oh man, if we could shake that guy loose?
It all depends. Like Giannis, I think if he's healthy, but at this stage, like he keeps getting hurt. So, it's a.
I mean, there is some risk, right? Like, and you guys have already dealt a ton of first rounders. Like, you're talking about having to probably trade Cat and Miles Bridges and like
OG.
The one thing I will say about the Knicks is it's you don't really have that young player that somebody's going to be like, oh man, that guy's about to break out. Like, Miles McBride is interesting.
Sure.
But there isn't that guy that you're like, ooh, like the Knicks would throw him onto the table. It's going to be kind of a lot of your guys who make you work. Right. I look at it, I'm like, I understand when the Knicks would do the deal, but from a basketball perspective, I wonder if, if something like that did happen, if it's the thing where 2 years down the road, you're like, oh, that's the trade that destroyed this, the best era of Knicks basketball since, the, I don't know, Willis Reed era. I'm not sure if we want to count that one Spreewell year. I love Spree, but like whether people would look back and be like, that's the thing that killed the Knicks' greatest era, because, Giannis got hurt a bunch and they killed their depth, and then they were expensive and old and they didn't win any series anyways. And then all of a sudden the Knicks are back to being minutes.
Yeah. Like, no, I agree with it. I mean, that's the thing. I don't know exactly. They need just to rebuild, like if they're going to do it. But the Giannis thing, that scares me, because we gave up way too much to get Bridges in the first place. And then now to kind of do it all again with Giannis. And granted, if Giannis is healthy and can stay healthy, different story. But I agree with you. Like that could set us back, 5 years in basketball terms, as far as contracts and growing the team and making it a true contender, because the East is eventually going to get better all around. But for them, it's like I just keep hearing that talk with Giannis, and I'm going, I don't know. But I don't know like the easy solution. Like they're going to have somebody leave the West to come to the East. Like that's what's almost like when Kawhi came, left San Antonio for Toronto. Like you're going to need some kind of a player like that to really step up and change. I just don't know who would want out of the West per se to do that right now. But I mean, we'll have to see. Like I say, I have that fault. It's the bad relationship I want to break up with the Knicks. It's like I have that faith. Like maybe this is going to be the year, or things will turn around, and then they're going to crush my heart like the Rangers did this year. But I don't even want to get into hockey because it's just too painful.
As a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, I also am not super excited about getting into hockey right now.
Yeah, I can't. I can't. Like it's in my opinion with the Rangers, it's dreary and just bad contracts, and the team does not want to play for them, and it's going to be a long couple seasons, to say the least. I mean, at least Shesterkin is signed long term, but still, that's not enough.
Although the one thing, the one thing I'll throw in here is, I always, it's so interesting too, right? Because like when you're a fan of a team, you're obviously living and dying with your team, and you're like all your reactions, like you're like, oh my god, right? Like the Rangers last year, one of the best teams in hockey, right? That they won the President's Trophy, if I remember correctly, right? And then this year, it's just like everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And from the outside, as like a hockey fan, I'm like, I'm like, the Rangers could definitely be pretty good next year, right? Like this just seemed like it was just the year where everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, and they cleared some salary off, but like, from the outside, you're like, oh yeah, this happens to teams, like the Rangers are fundamentally a good team, but when you're in it, you're like, oh my gosh, everything is horrible. And as a Leafs fan, this year's been very much like the Rangers, right? Everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. And, in Toronto, it's just, actually Toronto fans are taking it with actually some degree of like realism, which is shocking, not normally how the city works, but there's still a lot of like angst. And I'm sure from the outside, people are just like, I don't know. I mean, Austin Matthews was hurt, and they traded Mitch Marner, so of course I went down. Their goaltending was still really good, and if they got a young, people probably from the outside are like, oh, this is not a lost cause. And so it is always interesting with sports, because when you're in it, you're just like, you're just so caught in the emotion of your city, and it's just like, everybody involved in this is the biggest idiot ever. But if you looked outside at some other team that underachieved, you'd just be like, oh, that was just a rough year for the Leafs, man. Too bad for them. Like you're not going to like the levels of operatic angst that you will for your own team.
It's so true. It's so true. But I mean, that's why I say, that's why I dive into comics, and that's why I go read great stories to get my mind off it, because it's a long hockey season. But that's why I'm telling everybody, make sure you go out and go get The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal on trade paperback, or go get the single issues too. Make sure you get this book in your hands, because you want to make sure we get volume 3 of this. It is well worth your time. If you're into fantasy stories, no matter what age you are, this book has something for you in it, and it is one of the best reads I've had a chance to do it for fantasies. And like, I want to see more of this universe happen again. Connor, we could stay here all night and talk, but I know you're busy, and I have got some stuff I got to do. Thank you again for coming on the show. We definitely have you back on sooner than later here.
Thanks so much, Ken. It's always a pleasure. I really enjoy it. And so thanks so much for bringing me on to Fanlight Zone Presents. It's a whole new experience for me, and I'm really excited. And I'm really excited to see what you and the team do with Fanlight. So all the best to you, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching. And the liner notes, we definitely have to plug, before we get out of here, the liner notes for Twisted Comics and The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal are in here on the liner notes. So whether you're watching on YouTube or in podcast form, you have the easiest links to go get these books and get familiar with it because they're great comics. And that's what we do here at Fanlight Zone. We like to cast attention on creators and content you need to know about. And there's nothing better than picking up these books and finding out what's going on here. So as always, thank you for checking out Fanlight Zone Presents. We'll see you next time.
It's such waste of time, swiping left and swiping right on people you could know. 'Cause anyone who's worth a damn be worth way more than a picture could ever show. You could find the right light, find the right angle, and never find your soul. And it can feel like a losing battle, and this plot is full of holes. This modern way of finding love just makes me feel so alone. And I can't be the only one sick of staring at my phone. So look up, talk to me, a better way to spend our energy. Just look up, talk to me. We don't have to float alone on the open sea. Don't know that I believe in the old time fable. Everyone has just one true love. All I know is you're across this table, and you're all I'm thinking of. So look up, talk to me, a better way to spend our energy. Just look up, talk to me. We don't have to float alone on the open sea. Talk to me. Talk to me. It's such waste of time, swiping left and swiping right on people you could know.